Gibbs.
Oh, wait, okay.
Just like Uncle Mike. 65 gave Noah that. Thank you. I gave Noah that wager thing a couple weeks ago. I don't know if he actually held on to it, but he gave it to him. When was it? Was it 3 weeks ago? Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah, I don't know if he did. I just said, hey, your mom said it, so I showed him. He's like,
I think he really likes this stuff. I don't. These guys are really hurt.
oh, yeah, it should have. Yeah.
He does.
There, middle school.
Morning. Morning, Cody.
Very happy about abstract thought. Yeah.
So maybe like
abstract. Yeah. So it's kind of like it's hard to explain. Like it's not that they can't get it. It just takes a whole lot more work to get from A to B.
Right.
I don't always know how to do it. Some of this stuff is like.
I'd like to see it expanded and get a little more in depth.
Some of this. Hey.
That's
a dangerous road.
Yeah, we
Be
did a
expanded with.
semester of this maybe. That's right.
Which one?
So.
Which part of it?
Alright.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's true.
Yeah.
Alright, I'll do this. Wait. That's loud enough. Apparently that's what you do start. I don't know. So it gets synced up with the sound. I don't mess with that, but apparently I'm supposed to. Okay. So we'll get started. This is like the second to last week, which is crazy. So thanks for hanging on. Next week will be the last week. It's like a teaser. It might be one of my favorite ones just because I think we like tie it all in. I know I kind of mentioned it, but I'm talking about kind of living apologetics, so I won't give it all away unless you want to come next week, and that'd be really fun. But I think it's really important. I know we haven't been a lot in the Bible because the point of apologetics is kind of to give you things that point towards the Bible so that it's, I don't want to say valid, but it gives it validity. So when you're speaking to someone, you can say, all right, maybe you don't believe the Bible, but let me tell you why I do, why I think it's totally true. And now you have all these things that are pointing back inwards towards it, and then you can use the Bible from there and go, and now look what this says. Excuse me, got kind of a cold movie. So this is the second last week. I'm going to talk about the ontological argument, which, fair warning, this one's going to be really fun. Like, really fun. This was the one, if you're here when I did the resurrection theory, talking about the resurrection, the history behind that, this was actually the one I was thinking ahead of time about maybe not doing this and subbing it out with the resurrection one. And then, if you're there, I just pulled this auto at the last second and just kind of decided that day, like, I'll just do this today instead of this other one. So I'm going to go ahead and teach the ontological. Fair warning, this is the one I go back and forth on the most. Like, there's some days where I'm like, I love this one, and other days I'm just like, it's kind of out there. You'll see what I mean. It's interesting. So first, though, before you open a pray, because I know I did it. God, thank you for today. Thank you for everyone here. Thank you for their hearts just to pursue you, God, to learn more. Maybe it's for themselves so that they can grow closer to you and they're weak in faith. Maybe it's for reaching others, God. Maybe it's more personal for some they love. Lord, I pray that you just bless that. They're able to draw closer to you, to have reasons and answers for their faith, Lord. It's an awesome thing to have, a beautiful thing to work on. It's not an easy journey, but it's an important one. And so I just pray that you bless ours and today as we go about learning more about you. We love you and praise your name. Amen. Okay, ontological argument. That's one of my favorite. I like this one because it's philosophically very deep. It's philosophically very sound. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot of weight to it. But then there's days where I'm like, it's not so great. I just don't know if I like it. So if you do like it, kudos. I'm just going to warn you, it's very abstract. It's very out there. It does make sense. It does work. It's just one of those things where I just have to say, like, what in the world are what? Like, you just have to like mull over It's one of those, and that's part of the reason I don't always like. I know I said I was going to move fast, and the point of this class wasn't necessarily for you to walk out going like, I understand 100% of everything they said. It was more just to go like, all right, here's this. I want you to get a taste. I want you to go like, man, that makes some sense. I want to learn more. I want to listen more. I want to read more. I want to understand more about that particular, vein, that particular argument. So hopefully this is something that you can just go like, okay, like that was interesting. I want to learn more about it. Some days I just don't like it because it really does make my head hurt. Like it's one of those things where you just think and sit on it and like, okay. It's kind of like my cat. I have a cat named Hagrid, but she's like pretty cute sometimes. And I'm like, there's days I'm like, oh, like you're a good cat. Like I'm glad I let my wife get you, and that's great. And then there's other days when he's like a monster, and I'm like, I regret the day I ever took my wife to the animal shelter and got you, because that was the biggest mistake of my life. It's kind of like that. That's like my cat. Like there's days where I'm like, this is great, and other days I'm like, I don't know. So I'm going to try and put it into a little nutshell and just make it as easy as possible. There's some different people who will spell it out in different points, and I've seen some where it's like 8 points, and some where it's like 2 or 3. So I'm going to do a little bit shorter one that's 2 or 3. It doesn't make it any less valid than the 8 points. Some of the longer ones, they just kind of, I think it's almost an unnecessary step that I just kind of get to make it a little easier. But first off, before we really jump in, we have to define something, which is possible worlds. And this is really what the entire argument hinges on. Let's see, one second. It hinges on this idea of possible worlds, which I'll define it. It's any description of logically possible worlds. So I'll So it's a description of any logically possible worlds that are not true. So we're just talking about hypothetical, basically, is another good word. Like we say possible, and the key word is logically possible. So we'll jump into that, but let me finish defining this. It's any description of a logically possible world that isn't true, but it could exist logically. So I'm not going to put logically again because it's a little bit redundant. So basically it's saying this. Think of a world that just could be logically possible. Now this is the key word, because you could think of a world and go, oh well, I could think of a world where up is down and down is up, and there's no gravity and this, and you start getting some crazy things. It has to be logically possible, which sometimes people won't think of other worlds. They think of we like to think of the fantasy stuff, right? Oh, there's magic, and it's like this other world out there. You walk through the closet and you get in Narnia and all these talking animals and lions, or Lord of the Rings, whatever your favorite thing is. Mine's Harry Potter. Like whatever magical world. It's not necessarily saying that. It's not saying magic can't exist, because this is the key word. It's got to be logically possible. It's not the same thing as any world you can't imagine, because you can imagine just about anything, really. It's any world that could be logically possible. So when you imagine a world, you have to stop for a second and think, okay, given what we know about the laws of nature, so on and so forth, could you logically extrapolate and say this world could exist? Let me give you an example. I can imagine a world where a unicorn exists. It's really not that hard. A unicorn is just a horse with a horn coming out of its head. So could there be a world where there's a horse that grows a horn coming out of its head? Yeah, we got tons of animals. Goats have horns. There's whales with horns. All kinds of things have horns. Rhinos, all kinds of things. So it's not hard. It's not logically impossible for me to go, there could be a world that logically it's possible exists where a unicorn is a real thing. It's logically possible. Now, that would be a description of a possible world. So anytime I say possible world, I'm just talking about this idea. A description of anything where it's like, okay, could this be possible? Could there be a world where people have no bones and they're just like all jelly and they flop around? I don't know. Maybe that could be. I don't think it would be logically possible, but I guess it could be. These are the kind of things you have to do. This sounds dumb. I told you, this is why this makes my head hurt. You're like, why are we talking about fantasy land like imagination was? Possible worlds and the idea of that is really not as far-fetched as it sounds at first. Because we start talking about things that don't exist, right? We start talking about unicorns and spaghetti monsters and clouds made of cotton candy, whatever it is, and you're just like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I agree with you, but the idea of it is actually pretty prevalent, especially if you're talking about the areas of science or the areas of physics. It's actually a very common idea. And if mathematics, if you know a lot about mathematics, they'll use other dimensions to prove some of the mathematical equations. They'll prove that other dimensions could at least exist. And in physics, I believe in the area of string theory, which, please don't ask me anymore, I just know that that's what it's called and a little bit about what it is. But I don't know the mathematics of it, I'm not a mathematician. But having this possible worlds thing, saying that there's an infinite number of worlds possible, is actually a prevailing view right now. This isn't some old thing that's outdated. This is brand new, breaking edge in science. That possible worlds are a thing. It's not just philosophy. So the idea of a possible world isn't as far-fetched as it sounds at first, because they use it to prove things in our world. They use it for mathematics. They use it to try and discover some more of the beginning and the founding blocks of our world, which is kind of crazy. So here's how the ontological argument progresses, basing on the whole idea of this possible world. The other thing it says is we have to start with God. So first it says God is the greatest conceivable being by definition. So I'm going to define a couple of points. We're pretty okay with saying this: God is the greatest conceivable being. That means God is the most powerful, the strongest, biggest, whatever we're going to put in, being that you can think of, person that you can imagine, that you can comprehend. And there's a couple points, but they'll say He is all-powerful, right? We say God is all-powerful. And if you know a little bit, they'll do the words, which would be omnipotent, which is just a fancy word for all-powerful. So God is an all-powerful God. He created everything. He holds the world in His hands. We sing that to the little kids. He's an all-powerful God. He's also all-knowing, right? Which is funny because some people start arguing some of these points, but if you define God as creator of the world, right? He made the world. He knows everything about it because He put it together. I mean, think about it. If you're building a house out of, let's just say, Legos, which is because I don't know how to build a real house, so I know how to do Legos though. You build a house out of Legos, you know everything about that house. You know what colors are where, you know how long it is, you know all the blocks that you use, maybe you're keeping count. If you built something, you know how it works because you were the one who put it together. So saying God's all-powerful, if He is creator, it's obvious He would have to be all-powerful. If He did create everything, it would be obvious that He would be all-knowing. He knows everything about how everything works because He made it. Just by nature of making it, that makes Him all-knowing. The word for that is omniscient. Fair warning, I may have spelled those wrong. And then all-present, of course, so God is everywhere, which is omnipotent. I'm pretty sure I got those right. Maybe I switched those. Does anyone know? My brain's not working today. But these are the three things that they kind of say, all right, He's all-knowing, He's all-powerful, He's all-present. He's the greatest conceivable being. So when it comes to the ontological argument, and we're talking about this idea of possible worlds and all this stuff, they say God is the greatest being you could ever think of, that you could ever conceive. And if you could think of anything higher, then that would be God, because that would mean you're not thinking of him correctly. To really define God, he has to be the greatest conceivable being, because he is creator, right? If you could think of someone who could create a creator, then that would be God, would it not? Because he is these things. We know that. It says in Scripture, he's all powerful, he's all known, he's all present, he's everywhere. You can read it multiple, David, when he's writing, where can I run from your presence? Shall I sink to the depths of the sea? There you are. Shall I climb ice mountain? There you are also. And it's reiterated in other scriptures there, in fact, that God is in fact these things. I'll get to that in a second, actually. I'm changing my mind. So here's the progression of the actual ontological argument. We have this idea of possible worlds. So think of any world that can be logically possible. We have this definition of God as the greatest being, the greatest thing, the greatest power presence that you could possibly imagine. And it goes like this. One, we're going to do 3 easy steps that'll kind of really nicely sum up the ontological argument. If I can conceive in a possible world or a possible universe, a maximally powerful God, that just means an all-powerful God, just kind of the way that we just described these things. If we can conceive in any possible world or any possible universe God, as we defined him, as he's defined in the Bible, so I'm just going to put God, but know that by God I mean a maximally powerful God, an all-powerful, and all-knowing, and all-present God. So if there's any possible world where I can imagine that, I can conceive it, and it's logically possible. This is the key for any time we talk about a possible world. If it's logically possible that I can conceive of God, and I'm going to choose to stick to just a God. So the first step is I can conceive a possible world where God, like we know God to be all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present, exists. God that's like described by the Bible. I can conceive that. It stands to reason that maybe somewhere along the line, I'm going to erase this. Is everyone good if I do that? Okay. I can conceive somewhere along the lines that there is in fact a God who is all-knowing, a God who created that. Maybe you're saying this is us, and I like to draw pictures. It helps me think through things. So let's just say this is our universe, our world, whatever you want to call it. It could be realm existence. And then now we have an infinite number of other ones. And this is the possible worlds. This is kind of like the arc of the possible worlds. You could have this one. Maybe this is where the unicorns are. I don't really like unicorns, but if you do, cool, go try to figure out what happens. It'll be fun. So maybe you have this one, maybe there's this one, but it just keeps going. Maybe somewhere along the way, it just makes sense that let's just randomly pick this one, that there can be a God who made this world, right? And we've already talked about some of the other, things that we see to support that, right? We talk about morality, and you have to have God for morality to exist. We talk about the cosmological argument, which is looking at the cosmos, at the universe, and saying, this thing is so complex, the chances of it getting here are just so incredibly narrow. Surely there's got to be some kind of creator. We kind of talked about that, the watchmaker argument. When you see all the things just working together perfectly like they are, no one looks at the back of a watch and goes like, what a happy accident, what a great explosion that must have happened in the watch factory to create this. And today says someone made it. So it's the same thing. It's conceivable logically that maybe this world over here, not necessarily ours, but a possible world that God created it, that there is a God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present, who just created the world and he knows it. Look, I'm not going to get there yet. I keep wanting to get to something, but I'm going to save it. Here's what the second point does. It says, I can conceive. I can think of that where it would be logically possible. So if I can do that, the second point is going to be this. If I can conceive a possible world where the existence of God is, as it's described in the Bible, then if he does exist in that world, in that possible world, so if God exists in any possible world, so anyone I could possibly think of, so let's just say somewhere along the lines here, if he could exist in this possible world, then he exists in every possible world. And then number 3 is, therefore, God exists. That's the ontological argument. Some of you may be going, what in the world? This is what it's saying. God is all powerful, he's all knowing, he's all present. So if I could conceive in this world here where there is a God as we described, then that means that God also exists here. Is basically what that whole thing says. Here's why. It's all based on the definition of God. Part of the reason, I'm going to go on a slight tangent and bring it back in, so just stick with me for this. We like to think of time as this. Here's the beginning of time, the universe happens, God speaks it, explodes, whatever. And then we'll think, okay, here's the end. Obviously, we don't know where, when that is, but this is it. We have to think of time as this line. And sometimes the problem we have with God is we see God up here, and we say, okay, so this is time, existence as we know it, and God's up here. He's kind of above that, right? He's all-knowing, he's all-present, he's all-powerful, so he made it. And we think, God is above time, beyond time, so he can look and he can see the beginning of time. And you can also look and see the end, right? So he knows what's going to happen, all-knowing, right? He knows what's going to happen. So let's just say this is you, so you're born here, and maybe this is where you get married or retire, and then you die here. God knows everything that's going to happen. And sometimes we have this problem, we go, okay, God, right here is where I lose my job, and I got in a car crash, and my house caught fire. So why, if you could see this, why would you not come in and fix that for me, or stop it from happening? Why would you not do that? If you are so good, if you're all-knowing, if you're all-powerful, why would you do that? Let me clarify something. A lot of times this is how we think of time, and I think that that's perhaps a correct way to view it. But something that no one in existence knows is what it feels like to be outside of time. We understand the concept of time, beginning, going, end. We understand, kind of how it works, but no one knows what it's like to be outside of it. You were born in time. You live in time. You progress through time. God is outside. No one knows what it's like to experience being outside time. We think that since time just feels like this big line, that if you're outside of it, surely you can just look at it like this line and see everything. But no one knows that for sure. I think, and there's no way anyone in the world could ever know this for sure, you're just going to have to ask God, but I think since we are, in fact, confined in time, God's outside, we have no idea what it would be like to be outside time. I think that perhaps God being above and beyond everything, that the beginning of time is probably just as present to God as the middle and the end. What if everything is just present, right? Because you're outside of it, so it's just there. And so we say, well, how could God possibly, doesn't he know everything? Yeah, because he's outside of it. One, he made it all, right? He made time, he made existence, so by definition, he's all-knowing. By definition, he's all-present because the beginning would be just as present to someone outside of time as the end is. So he almost has no choice, just by definition of who he is, but to be all present and all powerful. I mean, if you created it, it just stands to reason that you have some control, that you know exactly how it's put together, that you can do what you will with it. This is God by definition. Now here's where this comes into play. Now when we talk about the possible worlds, okay, so if he exists in a possible world, why would he exist? Here's why. Let's look at all possible worlds. Let's do it this way. Here's us. This is existence as we know it. And I don't just mean Earth, I mean like the universe, everything as you know. And here's all the possible worlds, and they go on and on and on and on and on. Here's the one where we say, yeah, it's possible God could have made that. Here's the thing. If God, by definition, is the one who made everything, and he's outside of time, he's all-knowing, he's all-present, he's all-powerful, then it stands to reason that if he could exist here, he didn't just make this one little world possible world. He actually is in control of all of it. Because he's all-knowing, he's all-powerful, he's all-present, and that's why it jumps from here to here. So it's going, yeah, I can logically conceive that, and if I can logically conceive that, then number two stands to reason that God exists in any possible world, and he exists in all possible worlds, which includes ours, right? The actual real world. So God exists. That's the ontological argument, which is really something. But now here's the funny thing, actually. These points are incredibly philosophically sound. And actually most people say, yes, this actually stands to reason. It sounds a little out there, it sounds a little weird, but just about everyone who studies philosophy will say these points actually do go together. You have to follow them. It logically makes sense. It's philosophically incredibly sound. The big thing that you get to is here. Everyone's going to argue over this. Can you actually conceive a possible world where God is described by the Bible? This is where you get the argument. But once you conceive this, once anyone goes like, well, yeah, there could be some world, that there's an infinite number of logically possible worlds, that a God like the Bible describes is true, then 2 stands of reason and 3 stands of reason, and it just goes, and you go, right, then God exists. If you want to know more, the guy who actually started this is St. Anselm. Actually kind of made famous the ontological argument. This was hundreds of years ago. He came up with this as kind of the end-all philosophical argument for the existence of God. Now there's been, obviously, when something is as old as this theory, there's going to be people who have both sides. They'll say, well, we just prove it this way or this way. But really what it comes down to is this. It all gets argued over if you can't conceive of God. And then you start arguing about these weird logical, possibly, worlds. And, so that can get really fun and muddy. But basically what it comes down to is this. If you're talking to someone you don't know, if you can even conceive that there could be a world, if there's an infinite number of worlds, where there's a God who made it, and then by definition of him making the world, of making time, makes him all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present, then that means that he is in fact all-powerful, all-present, all-knowing, extending all the way to our world. Then you gotta admit that God exists in our world. It's a pretty good argument, it actually is. It makes my head hurt, like I said, thinking about possible worlds, going through that. It's weird ground, it's very abstract, it's kind of out there, but it's actually philosophically sound. It's very good reasoning. It's a pretty good argument, as much as I hate it sometimes. And I don't know if you guys are like, man, that's amazing, or maybe you're sitting there going like, God, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I don't know who came up with that. That's okay. Because I tend to not use this argument. I do, but I tend to stay away from it solely because, one, it's very difficult to understand. If anyone, doesn't have any idea or definition of what a possible world is, then you have to start defining that and explaining it to make sure they're not just going, well, I can think of a world where everyone's made of donuts and jello. Like, and then you're like, no, you can't, because and you start getting this weird stuff. But if someone is familiar with the idea of possible worlds, maybe they have some background in mathematics, maybe they have some philosophical background, this is a pretty strong argument when it comes down to it. I find it just takes a lot to clear the air first before you can actually start presenting the 1, 2, 3, because you have to talk about God. He is one, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and you have to make sure, okay, they're on the same page when you're presenting that, as well as they're understanding what we mean by logically possible, by all possible worlds, and they're not getting distracted. And it basically all comes down to this big if right here. Can you conceive the possible world of the existence of God, where he's real, as it's described by the Bible that he is? So that's the ontological argument in a nutshell, really. Like I said, some people, I believe, William Lane Craig, kind of flies through the ontological argument. I think he does like an 8-point, but he basically just takes these two sentences and splits them and makes different points out of them. But it's the same thing. If you read it from point 1, then 2 and 3 just naturally follows. If I'm speaking to someone though who really does have questions about the Christian faith, they're genuine. They're going, okay, how do you know God exists? Or maybe they're just having a hard time. Like, Rob, I kind of believe, but I just don't know. I can guarantee you I'm not just going to start with this and go, well, let me show you, because if you have all these possible worlds, and then, because sometimes they're just going to go, what? You said what now? So I probably won't start with this, but here's what I do. If someone does have a question, or if they ask me a question, maybe it's, that age-old one, like, if God's so good, why is there evil? The first thing I do is, one, not just jump out wielding one of these awesome arguments that we've talked about so far. We've got 6 of them. First, I'm just going to ask good questions. Because every person has a worldview, right? We talked about that in the second week, which means that everyone they have a set of assertions, they have some presuppositions, they have a way that they view the world, and maybe there's a reason that they're asking the question they're asking. And behind every worldview is actually a person. We don't ever want to forget that. So there's a worldview, there's an assumption, but it's not, you can't just separate someone's view from who they are. That's important. Behind every worldview is a person. And behind every person, there's a story, there's a past, there's something, there's reason. So I like to ask good questions, because that's how you get good answers, right? You don't just come out wielding guns a-blazing and shut them down. That's probably not the best way to go about things. So I like to ask good questions, and if they go, well, you find out a bit about their worldview, I don't believe. I do believe, but I have trouble. And you find out about them as a person, maybe they've been struggling with this for years, or maybe they are just belligerent. They just like beating up on Christians because they think they're smarter. There's ways to handle that. But you get through the worldview to the person who heard about their story, and then you answer the question. What I do is say, you know what? Those are good questions. Let me just show you why I believe in God. One, I have worldviews, but when I was looking at science and God, and found out that they're actually really compatible. Found out that it actually makes a lot of sense. There's reasons. In fact, I can't even do science without God, because if I take God out of the equation, how can I even know that I know anything? I can't. It's part of the system. And so I'll say that. I'll talk about morality. Maybe it's I noticed that you were asking about, if God's good, why is it evil? Fun fact, you can't ask that question without having God to begin with. Because evil doesn't exist without somebody. Right? You can't have evil without good. You can't have good without a moral law. We're talking about something that transcends everybody, all of humanity. You can't have a moral law without the moral lawgiver, who is God, right? So what becomes a good question then? And if that's not enough, you can always go, and you know what else? I was looking at I was looking at the world. I looked out in nature. I saw how uncanny it is that DNA is formed the way it is. I saw the incredible, huge chances of the world just becoming what it is to begin with, and just thought, there's no way that can just be some grand coincidence. It's too far. It's too long of a shot. It's too far of a stretch. And you could say, if that's not it, I was looking at all these possible worlds and just decided that if God could exist in any possible world, then he had to exist in our world. And that's kind of what we've been through so far. It's basically the scope of the class, as what we've taken it is most of these right here are our arguments. So that's how it's break down. We'll get a little bit more into that next week, but that's the ontological argument. So I'll open it up if there are questions. I did forget one too, so this should actually be the resurrection, which I actually really like that one. Looking at the history of the fact of the resurrection, you can say, just taking things into account, it just seems like Jesus actually rose, which validates the entire Bible, right? Which validates everything we know about the world. So on the ontological argument or anything else, are there any questions? Like I said, I know this one's out there. I know it's a bit weird. I'll do my best to answer if you have a question or comment or anything.
What do you mean by other worlds?
Yeah. It's just a theory. So it's not like a proven thing where anyone's saying like, oh yeah, we prove that there's other worlds. It's just saying a possible world, almost like another dimension, but not necessarily the same thing.
Like somebody living on Mars?
No. You ever see like, what's that show where all the weird trippy things happen all the time?
Mr. Unicorn, we'll just give it to you.
Unicorn. Oh, you did just the unicorn. Okay. Sorry about that. I forgot you kind of came in late. So, a possible world is just saying, think of a world that doesn't necessarily exist, but it could exist. So it's kind of like, it's not the same as imagining, because it has to actually make sense that it would exist, but let's just say there's a world where a unicorn exists. Everything's the exact same, except there's just a breed of horses that have a horn popping out of the middle of their head, which isn't that far-fetched to think of, because we have, goats that have horns, there's rams, there's cows, there's even whales that have horns that look like unicorns. So it's not that far-fetched to think there could be a horse where the only difference between that entire world, so this is like our world as we know it, and then there's this world where unicorns exist. So everything is the same except the unicorn thing. So a possible world is just saying, can you think of a world that could exist? It doesn't exist, but it looks maybe exactly like ours except for this thing. Or maybe there's this, maybe the grass is blue and the sky is green. That's not that far-fetched either. You could say, okay, yeah, that just makes sense. It's just the way the light is reflecting off. And so there could be a world where the only difference is everything just got swept blue, like, blue and green just got swapped. So Kentucky bluegrass is actually a real bluegrass, and then you got the green sky. So, that's what we mean by possible worlds. It's anything that could be logically possible. It doesn't exist, so it isn't true, but it could exist if we had like an infinite number of possible worlds. I know it's out there, but that's what it is. Does that kind of help not make the
I'm not sure you have to go outside of our world to think it's logically possible. Somewhere in time, there had to be the first human being that saw a tornado fall out of the sky and rip things up, and he probably went back and told all of his clan or his people that story, and they said, no, you've been eating those rotten grapes again, haven't you? No, it really exists. Well, that's not logical, and it's not possible. There's no way that happened. I seen it. If you grew up in a desert, never heard of a tree, had no idea what a tree was, and I gave you this little black thing and said, if you put that in the ground, it's going to grow this wooden thing that you don't even know what wood is because you don't know a tree, and this thing's going to grow up out of the ground, and these little ball things are going to come off of it, and you can pick them off and eat it. You're going to say, not logical, not possible. That's going to come from this? No way. Logical? It's not that big of a leap from a tree. Not a big leap at all. Are you kidding me? If I can believe that a tree is going to grow up out of the ground and I'm going to be able to eat things that grow off of it, then why not a God?
Yep. Yep. Very true. Actually, there's this isn't related, but there is a sort of argument C.S. Lewis says in Pure Christianity. He's talking about, it's not like the strongest argument, but it's close to what you said, like why not a God if a tree can. His argument was, a fish in the water never questions that there's anything more. It's just like, hey, I'm good with water. It never longs for land. It never says, like, why can't I grow feet and walk up on land and run around? Like, it doesn't do that because it was made for water. So it's just curious that we all long for something else. Because we do. And that's a universal thing. If you're looking at something and saying that's wrong, that means that you have an idea of what it should be that it's not. So it'd be like a fish saying, man, it's wrong for me to be swimming around in this water. I need to be on land. He's saying it's the same thing. We all have a longing for heaven, for something else, for something perfect, because we're knowing this isn't right. And so when someone's like, oh, this shouldn't happen, that's wrong, I need to be, I just want something more in life. You ever think, why is that? Because that's a really weird thing. Or why do you even get upset when people die? Because that's strange, because everybody dies. It's been like that since the beginning. Every single person dies, but for some reason, we just don't like it. But, we don't get upset when a tree falls, unless it was super special, but, a tree falls, and you're just like, oh, well, that stinks, let's shade. But we don't get bent up over it. But someone dies, which is just as common as a tree falling, and you go, this is terrible, this shouldn't happen. It seems like it's pointing to something more. It's kind of the same thing. It's not illogical to jump that far to go from trees producing fruit and us eating them to maybe there's someone who made all of this. That means there's a reason for everything.
And it's not just natural phenomena either. It's man-made. If I had never seen a TV and somebody told me, take this box and sit it down and watch these pictures come through the air somehow and into this little box, and you're going to see that, it's not logical. It's not possible. That's some kind of magic. No way.
Yep.
If you can believe that, it's not that far of a leap.
Awesome.
I have a question about that. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
This is just, I really appreciate you kind of putting it together. If somebody comes to you and has sincere questions about the Christian faith, you said you ask good questions to start out with about their worldview and who they are and what their story is. What questions do you start with?
Usually that. Usually, everyone has some kind of assumption, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes I point out kind of the morality thing. But sometimes the first thing I would say is, okay, because you can ask a question, I don't know, do you believe in God? So the first thing I say, well, do you believe in God? Did you believe in God? Did you grow up in church? Tell me what's going on, because a lot of times I said that's usually the first question I have. Sometimes there's something else going on. So if they're asking about God, where do you stand on it? Are you someone who does believe but just has some doubts? Are you a skeptic who doesn't believe? Are you hardcore, atheist who just really likes to argue? Because it's going to change how I view things. If you're just here to argue with me, I might appease you for a little bit, but I ain't going to stick around and try to, I will do everything I can to help them, but if someone doesn't want to be helped, they don't want to hear it, they're not going to hear it, they're not going to get helped. So don't throw your pearls before swine, if I can quote Jesus on that. Which doesn't mean I'm going to walk away no, you stink. I'll give them a shot, but sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Argument for the sake of argument is not really my thing. So it's usually what's your background, what happens, did you believe in God, have you ever been to church, and then what's your history with this? Some people haven't read a single book that would explain why God exists, and some have read it a lot, and that's going to change things. I know there's a gentleman who saw an email, and he was nice enough to actually put his whole background in it so that I didn't have to, okay, tell me about him. But I mean, he's read Weird Christianity, he's talked to a bunch of pastors, he's done all this, and he still has doubts, doesn't know how to express it. And I'm going, that's going to change how I talk to you. If you've never read the book or the existence of God, and you just grew up, getting taught that it was stupid, then I'm going to start somewhere else. If someone was going to talk to me about something, and they're going to say, well, let me prove to you God's not real, and they start spouting off all these arguments that I've already read about and studied, I'm just going to go, check out at that point. And the other person will do the same. If they're like, well, I've heard that argument and that and that and that. And there's a point where they're going to check out unless you're able to present it in a way that means something to them. So that's what I say.
So this ontological argument could be a possible starting point, because you could just ask the person, whether you believe or don't believe, do you believe that it's possible?
Right. And
Maybe you don't believe yet, but let's just say, if you can have enough imagination to say, I guess it's possible. That's why they would be asking in the first place, probably, right?
The one thing I say, just for caution, is you can do that, and it's a good setup. But if they don't understand the idea of possible world and defining God, then it's a lot of conversation just to get back to let me show you why. That's why I tend to not always use it. I don't like to stay around the ones that have a ton of back and forth. Not because I dislike arguing, I actually like it too much sometimes. I grew up with a little brother, so I'm really good at it. But if there's a lot of disagreement about a certain topic, it doesn't really get you anywhere. It doesn't really help you too much, other than you're just having a fun argument. And there can be a lot of disagreement, especially on like, oh, this hit fit. And if that's where you're going to get stuck and you're going to keep saying it over and over, or if you got to keep re-explaining what possible world means and talking about that over and over and over, I don't know if you've really helped yourself all that much. Now you could, especially, that's what I was saying, if someone has a history in mathematics, philosophy, and knows about this idea, it's a little bit easier to say, well, you could concede then, because it's going to track with them already. I don't know if that.
So if that person can at least say to themselves, if, then the door's open. Mm-hmm. But like you said before, if they say no way, well, then that's a little tougher hurdle.
Yeah. So it's just kind of, you gotta use your best judgment on those things.
I'd like to hear you elaborate more on the time thing. Because I've always thought, okay, for us to think of time is always moving forward. It doesn't go backwards or sideways, or it doesn't stop. It's always, but before God created what we know as time, when He still existed, there was a void. Well, that void existed somewhere. It had to exist somewhere in time, but maybe that time wasn't moving. Was it going forward? I don't understand before time and after time.
No one knows what it is like to exist outside time. So that's kind of no one knows conversation.
Is there a place outside time?
Well, it has to be. God made it. But no one knows what it's like to exist outside time. So that's the takeaway. That's basically all you can say. I mean, you can speculate all day, but at the end of the day, you're speculating. So you just gotta ask me. It's important. It's an important distinction, because a lot of people will argue. Well, they will argue like God is subject to time, but our definition of God is that He in fact is not subject to time, which changes his perspective, because it means his perspective is not our perspective, which is a big deal. Because they'll say, well, everything dies, or everything has a creation, everything has a starting point, so then God does. And say, no, because if He's outside of time, where's the starting point outside of time? There is none. Which is a hard concept to understand, because everyone is already in time. So that's what I was kind of saying. there's a lot of speculation that can go with that, but at the end of the day, as long as you just know by definition God is outside of time, that will help you.
So there's no starting time, there's no ending time either.
Which is our definition of eternal, right? Which is what we say, God is eternal. He was and is to come. So there you go. I don't know if that means heaven will have no time or just infinite. That's a fun thing. Anyway, all speculation. But yeah, so that's it. Thanks guys. Next week's the last week, so that'll be fun. We'll conclude our little 8-week journey, and I still have some resources if you guys want to pick them up or you want more. So feel free to grab those and see y'all next week.
This one was too depressing.
Huh?
This one was too depressing.
I told you I go.
No spaghetti monsters or cotton candy clouds.
I go back and forth on this one. Richard Dawkins presented an argument that he said kind of disproved it. Well, in a way, he actually has something that he coined called the black spaghetti monster, which is actually where I stole that from. Where he says, you can't, with 100% certainty, disprove God. So some people say, well, that means God must exist, right? But then they'll say, well, you can't with 100% disprove the spaghetti monster. Like, there's a possible world where we could say there's a spaghetti monster that exists, which means that he could exist in our world. And it's not philosophically all there, but.
Have you seen the newest open season?
Which one?
The newest open season?
I haven't actually. I only seen the very first one.
It's good. It's kind of.
Wow.
There's supposedly this fictitious monster in the bear region that doesn't exist. Yeah,
Kind of that same along the lines.
I just watched it last night. That's why.
Is it brand new?
Yeah.
Mine.
Yeah. Well, because some of them actually saw it. They didn't see it, but they thought it was. And then the big tall hunter guy drew a picture of him. It was scary.
Hey Rob, I sent you something. I sent you something that I have to pay the other day from Business Journal. It's weird.
Was it?
No, tax.
Oh, was it like?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was about like how with U.S. banks and there's 20 to 50% chance that you're living in a dangerous right now.
Oh yeah, that's a really fun thing. I didn't get into that, but that's like a whole philosophical thing. But
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to put you can't disprove that you're and
But why is Bank of America even like having these things and stuff?
Well, because it's I mean, if that's the case, you put that into a possible world, your terminology, then they would have the ability to sell investments online.
I think that's what I'm going with it.
it's yeah.
You don't get into that kind of philosophical?
No, I do, and that's actually a really common thing. Like we can't prove that you're not in a matrix or something just like television. You can't even prove that you're not just like dreaming everything with 100% certainty. And so what you get into then is a bunch of like, well, arguments, decisions, like, well, what about this, and well, yes, you can't prove existence with 100% certainty. And you start looking at, well, what can you prove then, like what can you know for certain? And you get back to the called self-evident truths, and that's where you have to build. And so it basically comes down to, it's more likely that I do exist than I don't, which if you ever heard, I think if where I exist, that was actually in response to some of those arguments. He was saying like, the best way to know that you do in fact exist is that you have thought and you can think of yourself as a being. And then you have to argue like, well, what is existence, what is consciousness, here and there, which I tend to not run into those because that's, I don't like
You
the
go on and
scary
on, you can't really. Really, I mean,
Yeah. You can, what you basically, what it comes down to is, it's more likely that this is reality and I exist in it and that it's not. So you have to operate on that, which is, again, why you say everybody has faith. Nobody really, not everybody thinks about that. At the end of the day, there's, to know something fully, you have to, it's, there's the evidence where you have to experience it, but you can't experience all knowledge. Because, like, think about history, you're there to affirm it, right? So how can you know really what actually happened? Because you weren't there. And that's the thing. Or if someone says, you'll never believe what I saw. Well, I don't believe it. You know what I'm saying? Because you have to see it. But think about how much stuff you get taught in school. And everything you're taught in school, you're not really experiencing most of it. You're just getting it collected from your sources. That's what it comes down to. Because you can't know exactly. It's 100% certain. But you can't. Here's the weird thing. Not just to blow your brain. I want to show you this because I like thinking about this one. There's a statement that says,
I was thinking of something.
the only thing you can know is that we don't know anymore.
I don't
100% certain. That's actually a pretty common statement. Right, like the only thing you don't know. But the problem with that is you're saying the only thing you do know. So the only thing you know with 100% certainty is that you actually know nothing.
I have no idea where it was or anything, but.
Which refutes itself, right? So you have to be able to know something with 100% certainty, right? Have fun with that. I don't even really have an answer for that one other than
It's called open season scared silly.
scared silly.
Check this out.